On a humid August evening in 1982, Dorothy Walsh stood behind the chipped formica counter of the Starlight Motor Lodge on Route 40 outside Baltimore, Maryland, filing her nails and listening to the radio play soft rock classics, believing that her night shift would unfold exactly like the 800 nights before it. Monotonous check-ins of traveling salesmen and exhausted families, routine complaints about water pressure, and noisy air conditioners. The comfortable tedium of a job she had held for 6 years without incident or excitement. She had absolutely no reason to suspect that the man who would walk through the glass doors at 9:47 that evening, carrying a weathered briefcase and requesting a single room for 3 nights, would shatter that monotony in ways that would place her at the center of one of the most significant counterintelligence operations of the decade. But before we dive into this story, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so we can bring you the most gripping Cold War and espionage stories every day. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support us. Dorothy Walsh was 38 years old that summer, a divorced mother of 2 teenage daughters who had taken the night shift at the Starlight because it paid an extra $1 per hour, and because the quiet hours between midnight and dawn allowed her to read paperback mysteries and work on the community college coursework she hoped would eventually lead to a better job. The Starlight Motor Lodge was not the kind of establishment that attracted tourists seeking authentic American hospitality. It was a functional place, 42 rooms arranged in an L shape around a parking lot where the asphalt had cracked into geometric patterns and weeds pushed through the fissures with stubborn persistence. The neon sign out front buzzed and flickered, the R in Starlight having burned out 3 months earlier, despite repeated promises from the owner to fix it. Most guests stayed only a single night, passing through Baltimore on their way to somewhere more interesting, seeking nothing more than a clean bed and a working shower before continuing their journeys. Dorothy had developed a practiced efficiency in her 6 years behind the counter. She could complete a check-in in under 2 minutes, answer the same 5 questions about ice machines and checkout times without thinking, and assess whether a guest would cause problems simply by observing how they carried themselves when they walked through the door. Drunk guests got rooms away from families. Nervous guests who kept looking over their shoulders got the sympathetic smile and quick service that discouraged lingering conversation. Young couples without wedding rings got knowing looks, but no judgment. Dorothy had seen enough of human behavior during her night shifts to develop a philosophy of non-judgmental pragmatism. People traveled for all sorts of reasons, conducted all manner of business in motel rooms, and as long as they paid cash and didn't damage the property, their activities were their own concern. The man who entered the lobby at 9:47 appeared utterly unremarkable at first glance. He was approximately 40 years old, with thinning brown hair combed straight back from a high forehead, wearing a rumpled gray suit that suggested either a long day of travel or a general indifference to appearance. He carried a leather briefcase in his right hand and a small overnight bag in his left, moving with the weary shuffle of someone who had spent too many hours in airports or on highways. His shoes were sensible black Oxfords that showed considerable wear but had been recently polished. His white shirt was slightly yellowed at the collar, and his striped tie had been loosened but not removed. Everything about him suggested middle management, a regional sales representative or minor bureaucrat conducting unremarkable business in an unremarkable place. "Good evening," Dorothy said with the practiced warmth that was neither genuine nor entirely false. "Checking in?" The man approached the counter and set down his briefcase with careful deliberation. "Yes, please. A single room for 3 nights." His voice was pleasant but neutral, revealing nothing about his origins or intentions. Dorothy pulled out a registration card and asked for his name. "Michael Patterson," he said without hesitation. "From Philadelphia, just in town for some business meetings." Dorothy wrote the name on the card and asked to see identification. The man produced a driver's license issued by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the photograph matching his features closely enough that Dorothy gave it only a cursory glance. She wrote down the license number and asked if he would be paying cash or credit. "Cash," the man said. He pulled out his wallet and counted out bills for 3 nights plus tax, adding an extra 20. "I'd prefer a quiet room, away from the ice machine if possible. Something on the back side of the building." Dorothy accepted the money and provided change, then selected a key for room 28, which faced the rear parking area and was as far from the ice machine as the motel's layout allowed. "You're all set, Mr. Patterson. Checkout is at 11. If you need anything, just dial 0 from your room phone." The man thanked her, collected his key and his bags, and walked back out into the humid evening. Dorothy watched through the plate glass window as he crossed the parking lot to room 28, unlocked the door, and disappeared inside. Then she returned to her magazine and thought nothing more about Michael Patterson from Philadelphia. The next morning passed without incident. Dorothy's replacement, a cheerful woman named Brenda, who worked the day shift, arrived at 7, and they exchanged their usual pleasantries while Dorothy provided the overnight report. 2 new guests had checked in after Patterson. One guest in room 15 had called about a clogged sink. The ice machine was making strange noises again. Nothing remarkable. Dorothy drove home through the early morning traffic, slept fitfully in her dark bedroom while her daughters prepared for school, and returned to the Starlight at 10:45 that evening to begin another shift. Michael Patterson remained in his room for most of the next 2 days. Dorothy saw him leave once on Wednesday afternoon, driving away in a beige Chevrolet sedan with Maryland rental plates, and returned 3 hours later carrying a bag from a nearby diner. He made no requests for fresh towels, no complaints about the room, no phone calls that Dorothy was aware of. He was, in short, the ideal guest. Quiet, undemanding, causing no problems. Dorothy appreciated such guests. They made her job easy. It was on Thursday night, the second night of Patterson's stay, that Dorothy noticed something odd. She had been filing paperwork in the small back office behind the reception desk when she heard a car pull into the parking lot. This was not unusual. Guests and visitors came and went throughout the night, but something about the engine sound caught her attention. A low, powerful rumble that seemed out of place in a budget motel parking lot. Dorothy rose from her desk and looked through the office window that provided a view of the rear parking area where Patterson's room was located. A black Lincoln Continental had parked directly in front of room 28. The car's lights were off, but Dorothy could see 2 figures sitting in the front seat, neither of them making any move to exit the vehicle. She checked her watch. It was 1:37 in the morning. An unusual time for visitors to arrive at a motel, though not unprecedented. People traveled at odd hours for all sorts of reasons. Dorothy returned to her paperwork, telling herself it was none of her business. 10 minutes later, the door to room 28 opened, and Michael Patterson emerged. He was wearing the same gray suit, but had added a dark overcoat despite the August heat. He looked around the parking lot with obvious caution, then walked directly to the Lincoln and climbed into the back seat. The car's interior light came on briefly, long enough for Dorothy to glimpse 3 men in conversation. Then the light went dark. Dorothy found herself standing at the window, watching the scene with growing curiosity. Business meetings at 2 in the morning were unusual. Not impossible, but unusual. She tried to return to her work, but found her attention drawn back to the window. The Lincoln sat motionless in the parking lot for approximately 20 minutes. Then the rear door opened, and Patterson emerged, no longer carrying his overcoat, but now holding what appeared to be a different briefcase. Newer, darker leather. He returned to his room, closed the door, and the Lincoln drove away with its lights still off until it reached the street. Dorothy sat down at her desk and told herself she had witnessed nothing suspicious. Business could be conducted at any hour. Perhaps Patterson was meeting with clients who preferred discretion. Perhaps the late hour was simply a matter of scheduling convenience, but a small voice in the back of her mind kept whispering that something about the exchange felt wrong. The excessive caution. The darkened car. The switched briefcases. These were the behaviors of people hiding something, and while Dorothy believed in maintaining a policy of non-judgmental pragmatism about her guests' activities, she also possessed a sharp instinct for recognizing when situations deviated from normal patterns. She thought about her late husband, Tom, who had served in the Navy during the Korean War and afterward worked for the Department of Defense doing something classified that he could never discuss in detail. Tom had died of a heart attack 4 years earlier, but before his death he had occasionally shared oblique warnings about Soviet intelligence operations in the United States. Not paranoid ranting about communists under every bed, but measured observations from someone who had worked adjacent to the intelligence community and understood the ongoing Cold War struggle. Tom had once told her that Soviet intelligence services were extraordinarily patient and sophisticated, that their operatives blended seamlessly into American society, that the real spy war was fought not through dramatic confrontations, but through quiet exchanges in unremarkable places where nobody was paying attention. Dorothy stood up and returned to the window. Room 28 remained dark and quiet. The parking lot was empty except for the handful of cars belonging to overnight guests. Everything appeared normal, but that small voice persisted, suggesting that what she had witnessed was not a routine business meeting, but something that warranted closer attention. She thought about calling the police, but what would she say? That a guest had met with visitors at an unusual hour? That briefcases had been exchanged? The police would think she was wasting their time with paranoid speculation. Instead, Dorothy did something she had never done in 6 years of working at the Starlight. She pulled out the registration card from Michael Patterson and looked at it more carefully. The handwriting was precise and unremarkable. The driver's license number appeared legitimate. The Philadelphia address meant nothing to her. But as she studied the card, something nagged at her memory. She reached into the filing cabinet where completed registration cards were stored and began pulling cards from previous months, searching for something she couldn't quite articulate. 20 minutes later, she found it. A registration card from 4 months earlier for a guest named Robert Mitchell from Pittsburgh. The handwriting was different, as was the signature, but something about the formation of certain letters seemed familiar. More significantly, Robert Mitchell had also stayed for exactly 3 nights, had also paid cash, and had also requested a quiet room on the backside of the building. Dorothy pulled more cards. She found James Anderson from Cleveland 3 months earlier. 3-night stay, cash payment, rear-facing room. David Wilson from Detroit 6 weeks earlier. Same pattern. Dorothy laid the 4 registration cards side by side on the counter and studied them under the fluorescent lights. The handwriting was definitely different on each card, suggesting different individuals, but the behavioral pattern was identical. 3-night stays, always cash, always requesting privacy, always staying in rear-facing rooms. It could be coincidence, or it could be a pattern that indicated something more deliberate. She thought about the briefcase exchange, about the darkened Lincoln, about Tom's warnings, and she made a decision that would change everything. Dorothy picked up the telephone and dialed the number for the FBI field office in Baltimore. It was 2:30 in the morning, and she expected to reach an answering service or perhaps a night duty officer who would take a message. Instead, a male voice answered on the third ring. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Baltimore field office. How may I direct your call? Dorothy took a deep breath. My name is Dorothy Walsh. I'm the night clerk at the Starlight Motor Lodge on Route 40. I think I may have seen something suspicious. I'm not certain, but I think it might be worth reporting. The voice on the other end of the line immediately became more alert. What kind of suspicious activity, ma'am? Dorothy described the late-night meeting, the briefcase exchange, the pattern of similar guests she had noticed in the registration cards. As she spoke, she heard the sound of typing, someone taking notes. When she finished, there was a brief pause before the voice responded. Ma'am, what you're describing could be significant. I'm going to transfer you to someone from our counterintelligence division. Please hold the line. Dorothy waited, her heart pounding. She felt foolish and anxious, and uncertain whether she had done the right thing. Perhaps she was overreacting. Perhaps this was all innocent, and she had just inserted herself into a nightmare of bureaucracy and investigation over nothing. But then a new voice came on the line. This is Special Agent Robert Keller, Counterintelligence Division. I understand you've observed some unusual activity at your motel. Can you describe it again for me in detail? Dorothy went through everything once more, this time with more specific details about timing and description. Agent Keller asked precise questions about the Lincoln, about Patterson's behavior, about the registration card patterns. His tone remained professional and neutral, but Dorothy could sense intense interest beneath the surface. When she finished her second recitation, Keller spoke with careful deliberation. Mrs. Walsh, I want you to listen to me very carefully. What you've described matches operational patterns we've been tracking for several months. I cannot provide details, but your observations are potentially very important. I need you to continue your normal duties and give no indication that anything is unusual. Do not approach this guest or alter your behavior toward him in any way. Can you do that? Yes, Dorothy said, though her voice trembled slightly. Keller continued. I'm going to send 2 agents to your location within the hour. They will appear to be ordinary guests checking in. One will take a room near this Patterson individual so we can maintain close surveillance. The other will remain in the lobby with you to coordinate our response. It's critical that everything appear completely normal. If this man suspects any kind of investigation, he will disappear, and we'll lose an opportunity to roll up what we believe is a significant intelligence operation. Do you understand? I understand, Dorothy replied. True to his word, 2 FBI agents arrived at the Starlight Motor Lodge 47 minutes later. They were men in their early 30s dressed like traveling businessmen, carrying overnight bags and displaying the weary demeanor of people seeking a place to sleep. One approached the counter and requested a room for 2 nights, paying cash and making small talk about the weather. Dorothy processed his registration with the same practiced efficiency she would use for any guest, though her hands shook slightly as she filled out the card. The second agent lingered near the vending machines, apparently deciding whether he wanted coffee, then wandered back outside. The first agent, who introduced himself as John Matthews when they were alone in the office, explained the situation in more detail. We've been tracking a Soviet intelligence network that uses a series of couriers to move information between operatives in different cities. The couriers follow predictable patterns: brief stays, cash payments, meetings in anonymous locations. What you observed tonight was likely a handoff. Information collected by one operative being passed to a courier who will transport it to the next link in the chain. Your guest, whatever his real name is probably carrying classified documents or microfilm to be delivered to another contact. Dorothy felt ice water run through her veins. I had a guest room with a Soviet spy. Matthews shook his head slightly. Not exactly. The courier is probably an American citizen or legal resident who's been recruited or coerced into working for Soviet intelligence. He's not a trained KGB officer. He's what we call a support asset, someone who performs a specific function without necessarily understanding the full scope of the operation. But he's still committing espionage, and catching him could help us identify the people he's working with and the information they're stealing. Over the next 18 hours, the Starlight Motor Lodge became the unlikely center of an FBI counterintelligence operation. Additional agents arrived throughout Friday, taking rooms and establishing surveillance positions. A van painted to look like a commercial laundry truck parked across the street contained electronic monitoring equipment. A team of specialists set up in a vacant room next to Patterson's, attempting to listen through the walls, though the motel's concrete construction made audio surveillance difficult. Dorothy continued her shift, checking in legitimate guests and maintaining the appearance of normal operations, while chaos unfolded behind the scenes. Patterson emerged from his room at 11:30 Friday morning and drove away in his rental car. FBI surveillance teams followed him to a downtown Baltimore office building, where he spent 2 hours, then to a restaurant where he ate lunch alone while reading a newspaper. He returned to the Starlight at 3:15 in the afternoon and remained in his room for the rest of the day. That night, Dorothy returned for her regular shift, and Agent Matthews briefed her on the day's activities. We've identified the building he visited. It houses several defense contractors and consulting firms. We're working to determine which specific office he accessed and who he met with. We believe he's waiting for instructions about his next delivery. The pattern suggests he'll move the material he's carrying within the next 24 hours. At 1:52 Saturday morning, a different vehicle arrived in the parking lot. This time it was a dark blue Ford sedan with Virginia plates. The car parked in front of room 28, but instead of waiting for Patterson to emerge, the driver got out and knocked on the door. Dorothy watched from the office window as Patterson opened the door, exchanged brief words with the visitor, then invited him inside. The visitor carried a manila envelope. He remained in the room for approximately 8 minutes, then emerged without the envelope, but now carrying the briefcase Patterson had received earlier in the week. He returned to his car and drove away. Matthews, who had been monitoring the parking lot from his own room, immediately emerged and knocked on the office door. "We're going to let that vehicle clear the area. Then we're going to arrest Patterson before he can destroy any evidence or alert his network. I need you to remain in the office and act as if nothing is happening. There may be other guests who wake up and want to know what's going on. Tell them there's been a disturbance and that police are handling it. Can you do that?" Dorothy nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. 20 minutes later, 6 FBI agents converged on room 28. Dorothy watched through the office window as they knocked on the door and identified themselves. Patterson opened the door, and even from a distance Dorothy could see his expression shift from confusion to resignation. He offered no resistance as agents entered the room and emerged minutes later with Patterson in handcuffs and several cardboard boxes of material they had seized. Matthews walked Patterson past the office window toward an unmarked car. For a brief moment, Patterson's eyes met Dorothy's through the glass. His expression was neither angry nor frightened, just profoundly tired. Then he was placed in the car and driven away. Agent Matthews returned to the office an hour later while other agents continued processing the crime scene in room 28. Mrs. Walsh, I want to thank you for your assistance. Your observations initiated an investigation that has been extremely productive. The material we seized from that room includes classified documents from 3 different defense contractors, microfilm containing technical specifications, and communication equipment. We've also arrested the individual who came to collect the briefcase. Both arrests will lead to additional operations that I cannot discuss, but your vigilance has helped protect national security. Dorothy sat down heavily in her desk chair. I just noticed something odd. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just doing my job. Matthews smiled slightly. That's exactly how most significant counterintelligence breakthroughs happen. Not through dramatic confrontations or complex operations, but through ordinary citizens who pay attention and trust their instincts. The Soviet intelligence services count on people not noticing patterns, not questioning unusual behavior, not wanting to get involved. You did all 3 of those things, and you've helped us dismantle a network that has been operating for at least 2 years. The man Dorothy knew as Michael Patterson was actually Kenneth Brenner, a 42-year-old former systems analyst who had worked for various defense contractors in the Mid-Atlantic region before being recruited by Soviet intelligence through an intermediary claiming to represent a foreign business consortium. Brenner had been passing classified information to his handlers for 18 months, receiving modest payments that supplemented his income but did not dramatically change his lifestyle. He was not an ideological convert to communism, nor a trained intelligence operative. He was simply a man who had made a series of small compromises that eventually led to major betrayal, justifying each step along the way until he found himself too deep to extract himself. The investigation initiated by Dorothy's phone call eventually led to the arrest of 7 additional individuals involved in the spy network, including 2 employees of defense contractors with security clearances, a Soviet intelligence officer operating under diplomatic cover, and 4 couriers who had been moving information between operatives using the same pattern of brief motel stays and late-night exchanges. The classified information they had stolen included technical specifications for satellite communication systems, radar technology, and submarine detection equipment. Intelligence analysts estimated that the network had compromised dozens of classified projects and set back American defense capabilities by potentially years. Dorothy Walsh never sought recognition for her role in exposing the operation. The FBI kept her identity confidential for security reasons, listing her in official reports only as Confidential Source 14. She continued working the night shift at the Starlight Motor Lodge, processing check-ins and handling routine guest requests with the same practiced efficiency she had always employed. But something had changed in how she viewed her work. What had once seemed like a dead-end job with no broader significance now felt like a position of quiet responsibility. She was not just a motel clerk. She was someone stationed at one of the countless intersections where ordinary American life met the hidden world of espionage, where vigilance mattered, where paying attention could make the difference between security and compromise. The owner of the Starlight finally replaced the burned-out letter in the neon sign, so it once again proclaimed Starlight Motor Lodge to travelers passing on Route 40. Dorothy eventually completed her community college coursework and earned an associate degree in business administration. She was offered a position as an office manager at a local manufacturing company, better pay and day hours that would allow her to spend evenings with her daughters. She considered accepting the offer, but ultimately decided to remain at the Starlight. Not because she couldn't do better, but because she had discovered purpose in unexpected places. On quiet nights, when the lobby was empty and the only sound was the hum of the vending machines and the occasional car passing on the highway. Dorothy would sometimes think about Kenneth Brenner and the briefcase exchanges, and the way seemingly insignificant details could reveal profound truths. She thought about all the other motels along all the other highways where other couriers might be conducting similar operations, passing information that could harm her country. And she thought about all the other clerks and janitors and service workers who occupied positions that intelligence agencies overlooked, but which provided perfect vantage points for observation. The Cold War, Dorothy came to understand, was not fought exclusively by professional spies and counterintelligence agents. It was fought by ordinary citizens who remained alert, who recognized when patterns deviated from normal, who trusted their instincts enough to report what they saw. The vast apparatus of American security depended not just on satellites and electronic surveillance and classified operations, but on the accumulated vigilance of people who paid attention during their daily work. Motel clerks who noticed unusual guest behavior, mail carriers who recognized when letters seemed suspicious, bank tellers who questioned strange transactions. All of them were part of an unofficial network of awareness that served as the first line of defense against espionage. Dorothy never told her daughters the full story of what had happened that August night. They knew only that she had helped the FBI with something and had received a letter of appreciation from the bureau director. The details remained classified. But when her younger daughter asked why she didn't take the better job offer, Dorothy replied that sometimes meaningful work came in unexpected forms, and that being observant and responsible mattered more than titles or recognition. Years later, after the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union collapsed, some details of the spy network Dorothy had helped expose were declassified and appeared in books about Cold War espionage. The accounts mentioned a courier network that had been dismantled in 1982 following a tip from an alert civilian, but Dorothy's name never appeared in the historical record. She remained anonymous, a footnote in classified files, one of thousands of ordinary Americans whose quiet contributions to national security would never be publicly acknowledged. But on a summer evening in 1995, Dorothy received an unexpected visitor at the Starlight. Agent Robert Keller, now retired from the FBI, stopped by to thank her personally. He explained that he was writing his memoirs and wanted to tell her about the full impact of her phone call all those years ago. "The arrests you initiated," Keller said, "led to one of the most significant counterintelligence successes of the 1980s. We rolled up an entire network, identified dozens of compromised projects, and prevented classified technology from reaching Moscow. Some of the people we caught provided information that helped us understand Soviet intelligence methods and priorities. Your observations set all of that in motion." Dorothy served him coffee from the lobby pot, and they talked for nearly 2 hours. Keller told her about other cases where vigilant civilians had made the difference. A librarian who noticed a patron photographing technical journals, a maintenance worker who found hidden communication equipment, a restaurant owner who recognized suspicious meeting patterns. Each case reinforced the lesson that effective security required not just professional intelligence work, but also the awareness of citizens who occupied ordinary positions in ordinary places. When Keller prepared to leave, he shook Dorothy's hand and said something she never forgot. "The intelligence community has sophisticated technology and highly trained operatives, but we can't be everywhere. We depend on people like you, who have the wit to recognize anomalies and the courage to report them. You should be proud of what you did, not just that one night, but all the nights since when you continued doing your job with attention and care. That matters more than most people realize." After Keller left, Dorothy returned to her position behind the counter, The lobby was empty except for her. The radio played softly in the background. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Everything appeared exactly as it had for the past 13 years. Monotonous check-ins and routine complaints and the comfortable tedium of a night shift at a budget motel. But Dorothy understood now that monotony was not the same as insignificance, that routine work performed with attention and integrity could serve purposes larger than immediate circumstances suggested. She thought about the registration cards filed in the cabinet, each one a tiny data point in the vast stream of human activity flowing through the motel. Most represented innocent travelers conducting legitimate business. But somewhere in that stream might be another courier, another pattern waiting to be recognized. Dorothy would be watching. Not with paranoia or suspicion of every guest, but with the calm attention of someone who understood that vigilance was a form of service, that ordinary observations could protect extraordinary secrets, and that sometimes the most important sentries in the defense of a nation were people who simply showed up for work and paid attention to details others overlooked. The Starlight Motor Lodge operated for another 12 years before being demolished to make way for a shopping center. During those years, Dorothy continued working the night shift, greeting travelers and processing registrations, and maintaining her quiet watch over the stream of humanity passing through. She never encountered another courier, never witnessed another suspicious exchange. But she remained alert nonetheless, understanding that the absence of obvious threats did not mean threats did not exist, only that they had not yet revealed themselves. When the motel finally closed, Dorothy retired and spent her remaining years with her daughters and grandchildren, telling them stories about the interesting guests she had met and the peculiar incidents that had occurred during her long career in hospitality. She never told them about Kenneth Brenner or the FBI investigation, or the spy network that had been operating from Room 28. Those details remained locked away in classified files and her own memory, a secret she carried to her grave. But sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, Dorothy would think about that humid August evening in 1982, when she had stood at the office window and watched a briefcase being exchanged in a darkened parking lot. She would think about the phone call she had made, the investigation she had initiated, the network she had helped dismantle. And she would think about all the other ordinary citizens, in all the other ordinary places who had made similar observations and taken similar actions, their contributions to national security forever anonymous, but no less significant for that anonymity. The Cold War had been won not just through military strength or diplomatic maneuvering, but through the accumulated vigilance of people who understood that freedom required constant watchfulness. Dorothy Walsh had been one of those people, a motel clerk who paid attention when it mattered, who trusted her instincts despite uncertainty, who acted with quiet courage because it was the right thing to do. Her story would never appear in history textbooks or earn public commendation. But in the secret files of the FBI Counterintelligence Division, in the classified reports that detailed successful operations against Soviet espionage, her contribution was acknowledged and appreciated by those who understood its true value. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories and check out the video on screen. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. See you next time.